Alright, so I played a game recently called Paranormal Site: Seven Mysteries of Honjo. Okay, I recommend this. It's a really good visual novel, which does things in a bit of a different way. Almost like a movie, I suppose. Camera pans, some animations, jump scares even. It's still not a fully animated affair, true, but what is different here does make the whole experience more memorable and unique. It's probably closest to Danganronpa's Trials, although without the obnoxious minigames. What is it about? Tokyo is truly a wonderful city, home to millions. It's a gigantic metropolis with rich history, and even its minor parts can house some major folklore. Honjo, a small part of it across the river, is one such place. To this day, 7 mysteries survive. Some fairly innocuous, like a suspiciously loud drum. Others not so much, like the one about a poor girl dancing herself to death all the while calling for help, but please falling on deaf ears. And it's up to the plucky protagonist to figure out where these mysteries and their curses might lead. What did I enjoy? Okay, so first of all, the most obvious thing would be the actual lore here. Whenever it's based on real stories, I wouldn't know. It's also somewhat difficult to actually look that stuff up. So the gist is what this particular area of Japan has these sorts of stories related to them. I think everyone is familiar with these sorts of things in their own home country. Personally, as a citizen of a certain Eastern European country, growing up I've heard stories about tiny men living in the oven and looking after our home. A helpful entity which does its best to preserve a house in its full glory. If appeased with snacks under the oven, it would leave gifts. If ignored, the house will eventually fall into disrepair. Similar stories about the forest creatures. If encountering a stump in the forest, a person is meant to leave an offering there. If they do, safe passage in and out of a forest is guaranteed, but if not, then something bad might happen. Depending on how the entity feels that day, it might even be lethal. Sailors are probably most familiar for making up a lot of myths and legends like this, but I can't really think of many. Anyway, these are just the simple versions of those stories, and truth be told, my memory barely recalls these. But I'm sure everyone knows one or two of these, and obviously it's all nonsense, but learning about it, figuring out our history, not through carefully concocted records, but through oral account, unreliable but beautiful in its own right. And this particular game offers 3 versions of these myths. First is the currently surviving record, a game of telephone as they say, modified significantly and mostly losing its original grisly details. Then there is a second version, the dark and bloody one, connecting to the curse, and then there's the third version, where it all comes together explaining how one story begets the other. At one point the player is meant to figure this out, so a bit of a spoilers I guess. The mysteries connect mainly with 5 of them, and they aren't in order written. Aside from that, I've enjoyed the different way of presentation, as I have put it. I think everyone is familiar with how most visual novels are done. You've got a character in the middle, there's a text box in the bottom of the screen, and you are sometimes presented with options. This game has a panoramic view. The characters themselves sometimes move, there are moving shots, and occasionally while moving around there's also something might change. And at times it is used for jump scares. Also, there's an ability to use the curse sometimes, rarely, and a little inventory to manage, which is even more rare. And some other tiny bells and whistles. One doesn't expect a visual novel to be this visual. Again, it's still minor, but it's not like an FMV game or an FPS or something. But this offers a pleasant, unique middle ground which I haven't experienced before. And, well, I'm always looking for something new. And I suppose I've enjoyed the story itself, which, well, again, felt a bit different to how visual novels are usually done. The writing seems a lot less focused on holding the player's hand and a lot more focused on delivering clues without spelling everything out right. At times there are also interruptions and the players asked questions. It actually reminded me of Sekimeia, which I think is not a good game, but the idea behind it was very interesting. I feel like this game, Paranormal Site, is essentially what Sekimeia should have been. A shorter, smoother experience where the player doesn't just press next endlessly and instead actually tries to think and follow along with the story. Like I said before, there's a moment where the player is supposed to read the stories and figure out which order they are actually in. The characters in the game itself don't say this, the narrator doesn't explain it, and the player is supposed to figure it out and put it all together. There are a few moments like this, but honestly now that I think about it, I wish there was more. A lot more in fact. But it must be hard to balance. Lacuna had something similar, although it was a bit too simple. But yeah, I suppose if I were to bitch and moan, I can point out that some things are bloody obvious, like the identity of a guy with the biggest body count in the story, or who the daughter happens to be, or who the mastermind is. I can go on. Really, only plot point which gave me pause is the way to a true ending. And it was simply down to the fact that I played with low textures and didn't notice a very, very early clue. Gotta click a very hard to spot thing, and yeah, I gotta mention this, sometimes a game is a hidden object game. Generally things are pretty easy to see, but there are two moments I can recall, both of which are related to the same, let's say, plot point. And it was very hard to see them. Not gonna say more. Spoilers. So, yeah, the story was fun to me, even if it was too easy at times, and too hard to figure out at others. Very few others. I can totally imagine this sort of thing being exceedingly hard to write. Can't expect to know what people will or won't figure out, but the clues are in place. Those, I believe, are well made. So, yeah, I don't think there are really negatives, but I do have some personal pet peeves, like the controls. Not allowing me to have both enter and space as confirmed for the dialogue, or scrolling with a gamepad faster, it's really slow. Or displayed controls to not have bloody Xbox controller, which I've never had and don't plan to have. Yeah, I'm a PlayStation boy, goddammit. Keyboard and mouse worked fine, no, just a little clumsy, but yeah, sometimes I prefer to use the gamepad so I can lean back and relax. Oh, and the skip function doesn't actually skip, it just goes forward and at best the player can speed it up a little. It's more like auto-read instead of actual skip. So you can't actually go through the entire game in 5 seconds like the other visual novels. And like I said, with a true ending you kinda need to skim through what already happened and find where you need to go in a very, very specific point. And there is also a moment where the player needs to shake the camera to stay awake. That mechanic sucked too. It was just bad. It's too much shaking needed. I boosted DPI of my mouse just to not cause me carpal tunnel. I simply couldn't pull it off with a gamepad, by the way. Guess there's very little else to say. Cool little game. Wish there were more. A whole series of visual novels in this style would be awesome. Maybe even a sort of international folklore mystery series. But that's just wishful thinking.